Hey everyone, and welcome back. I wanted to do a short video today on the issue of FERPA and class recordings. So a number of us were participating in one of the Technology Thursdays today, talking a lot about Zoom and also videos in Canvas Studio. And one of our instructors brought up what I thought was an excellent question, and this is the issue of to what extent can you share publicly videos that you've recorded in one of your classes. And the specific scenario was, if I recorded a Zoom lecture and students were present, could I share that lecture, because I still want to keep that important lecture content, the next time I teach that class? So great question to really frame this short video today. So we'll talk about all the implications of FERPA using class recordings, whether you've recorded them on your own using a program, using Canvas Studio, or using Zoom. So if you're not familiar with FERPA, it's the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act of 1974. And in short, you can read the whole text in all its descriptive glory, but in short, it protects the rights of our students in terms of their privacy. So there are stipulations in FERPA, for example, that don't allow us to share rosters from one class with students in another class. And I brought this up in the past, but if you combine sections in Canvas, as we've talked about doing with some of these mega sections, if you don't separate out each of those students into their individual classes, because you're sharing the rosters, or students in one distinct class are sharing ideas with students in another distinct class, it's actually a total violation of FERPA. As we've moved towards more opportunities to expand education in virtual senses using Canvas and now using Zoom and video and even Canvas Studio, we certainly have to ask some new questions about FERPA to make sure that we're not violating issues. So just like we cannot share by combining multiple classes in one Canvas shell, the individual records of students in one of those unique classes with another. So we have to separate those out very carefully. We also have to think about that in terms of Zoom and Canvas recordings. Again, this came up today in a conversation. I thought it definitely warranted a little more information out there to discuss how FERPA applies to Zoom recordings and also Canvas Studio recordings. There's a lot of good information on the internet. Zoom itself has a really good Zoom and FERPA compliance document, which we can take a look at now. And my recommendation for you today is, if you're at all curious, type in Zoom and FERPA, or FERPA and Zoom, doesn't matter the order. And you're going to see a slew of articles, and a number of these I'll be sharing with you today. So first off, this is directly from Zoom, and I know people have been critical of Zoom since when we started using Zoom in March, and they've gotten a lot better in terms of Zoom bombing. K-12 districts, of course, typically different regulations in terms of protecting online privacy as it relates to Zoom and other issues. There's the COPPA law, which applies typically to our K-12 schools. So we tend to deal with FERPA exclusively. And so Zoom has, I think, a pretty lengthy guide set up discussing how to think about some of these issues. And this specifically talks about the security levels protecting data. We certainly wouldn't want hackers being able to access a Zoom recording, even though a Zoom recording is private. And keep in mind, every time you go to one of your recordings, and this is kind of a first step in learning about some things here, anytime you record a meeting, you have choice in the next step about whether you want to share that recording, how you want to share it, and regulations about sharing. The easiest way to do this is to click on the meeting. And I actually could have done it from the previous screen, but I would click on the share button. If I go to the previous screen, I'll click on the share button here. This is where you can start to think about some FERPA protection for your students right here at this level. Keep in mind, when something's recorded either using Confer Zoom or Zoom, Zoom is always the repository for things. Even though Confer now is your scheduler, everything happens and gets stored in Zoom. And so what's unique about Zoom to some degree over other systems, including YouTube, is you have a lot of choices about how you can share this. I wouldn't recommend necessarily, and it's not possible, it's locked, which is good, sharing the recording publicly. If that were turned on and all our videos were being shared publicly, that definitely could potentially violate FERPA in terms of student privacy. You can add an expiration date to a link. If you want it to end when your class ends, go in right now and you can say, I want this to end on December 10th, just to be safe. And your class may end before that. You can also choose whether or not something can be downloaded or not. Now, that being said, there are a ton of programs out there. Here's one I use all the time. I'll just load it up here. It's called 4K Video Downloader. And I can take any video by pasting in a link, and then I can immediately download that. And I have some choices about how I can download that in terms of quality. And I'm saying that because everything can always be downloaded. The easiest way for someone to do this would be to do a screen recording. I could load up QuickTime right now, and anything that you project on the screen, even if it's not downloadable, I can right now create a new recording here. So, and I won't do that. But the point I'm trying to make is, just because you have this checked on or off doesn't mean that people can't maintain or gain a copy of a video and then share that with the world. Those of you who taught with Dr. Albert Ponce, if you look up a situation he dealt with a couple years back, former history poli-sci instructor, he was profiled on NPR and a lot of other online major publications. Someone recorded a lecture that he gave at a public workshop, and then that video went viral. So we should never assume that because you think you're protecting yourself or your students by not allowing downloads, or you think, well, I'm not recording the Zoom, so there's no recording of it. Well, anyone can grab any kind of, audio recorder, right? I can record it off the air. I can use a screen capture program. I can even, in the simplest way possible, set up my phone on a tripod off screen, and I can record this screen that I'm doing right now with audio and video. So the assumption that because you're doing something without a recording button checked on Zoom, or you don't have the download button checked and you don't want people to download, doesn't mean that people can't record what you say or that you can't download it. And it's certainly something to remember in this day and age that if we're doing lectures and we're expressing any views, we just want to think about the fact as faculty that those views could always become public. It's just like social media. If you post something on social media, you never know when a social media comment will appear in some aspect of your workplace or some aspect of your life, your community groups or whatever. So nothing is ever truly private. And I think it requires a lot of us to think about our social media accounts in particular, and to maybe restrict access to people that we work with, or to do other restrictions to just make sure that we're safe in terms of anything that we share in a social media account if that filters into our workplace. And typically it doesn't, but you never know if something like that might happen. So it's important to think about privacy, I think, in general, of us as a collective group of faculty teaching and sharing ideas. And I'm not saying we should self-censor each other, but we should also be very aware of the fact that sometimes someone can record something or download something even if we don't give them permission or we don't think it's happening. But so this screen right here gives you a lot of choices. You could password protect a recording. You could decide what to display. And again, anytime you want to share something, you could copy that sharing information to your clipboard and stick it in your module. So this is the place where you would decide what to do with a cloud recording or a local recording. Most of us have this in the cloud to save some hard drive space. You decide what to do with this, and you can control indeed some privacy at this level in terms of controlling your recordings. So that's one step to think about, is if you're wanting to control access to one of these videos, you can do it there. Now, a second way of doing that, as we all know, is through our Canvas Studio. So if I click on a Canvas Studio video, I have a choice here. I can download it, and I could choose to share it. So in this case, it might be with specific people. I can share across the institution, or I would just create a link, copy that, hit done, and I share that. It's not as full-fledged, if you will, as Zoom in terms of maybe FERPA and privacy. So what I would say about Canvas Studio is just to keep in mind the fact that you can't control as much of the parameters of the video access as you can in Zoom. But keep in mind, you have total control over what happens with this video once it's created. Do you want students to see that video? What's the extent of being able to see that, and so forth? So just to go back to the Zoom compliance guide, it's pretty good to hear that they are certainly aware of FERPA. They're understanding about what educational records mean. As you can see here, video recordings and streams may be considered educational records under circumstances and may require parental consent if a minor is under the age of 18. So again, they're thinking about K-12. There's a whole stream separate of this talking about COPPA and guidance for K-12 instructors. So we're under different laws and obviously different age ranges of individuals, minors versus adults. But good to know about all the laws, certainly. And this talks a little bit about how they protect meetings, again, worrying about Zoom bombing or sharing computer data with third parties. I've heard from a few instructors out there that students have sometimes expressed about Proctorio concerns about privacy. It's a tricky balance. I know in today's society there's more and more concern about our data being used, certainly after the Cambridge Analytica scandal with that personality test and what happened in the last presidential election and Brexit and so forth. There's a lot of concern about, again, this really does tie in with social media, as I mentioned earlier, how our information gets shared. What if our employer sees something that we post on social media that they don't agree with? Or what if we don't agree with other employees who post things on social media? So it creates a range of issues between privacy and control. Who controls information? Do you control your own profile? Do you control your privacy on Facebook? And many of us have realized that the answer is unfortunately often no, that we don't have control over what happens with some of the things on social media. I'm mentioning this because in terms of something like Proctorio, the whole point of Proctorio is to lock down a student's computer, to use camera and artificial intelligence technology to detect if someone is maybe looking at a cheat sheet while they're taking a quiz or test. So in a sense, you give up some of your poli-sci folks would talk about the social contract. You give up some of your individual rights or sovereignty for the sake of the fact that you're trying to get an education. And part of that in the virtual environment is having to take tests and quizzes, maybe in your math or STEM classes, that are monitored by artificial intelligence and technology. So I think as these questions come up, you can think about your own answers to address privacy concerns that students may have about how things are shared, or what does Proctorio do if it's monitoring a test and so forth. Likewise, my recommendation would be for us to add maybe student privacy statements or protection statements in our syllabi, in our Canvas shells, to express that we understand what FERPA is and that we will do everything in our power to protect the privacy of our students. But I do know that as faculty, these concerns come up and we hear about it from our students, so it's important for us to be up to date on the law, the regulations, and then today some of the technology that we can use to control the sharing of particularly video information about our students to the wider world. Now, another source I wanted to mention here is this very good one, and what I'll do is I will be sure to share these with I'll put these links. I'll either send them out in an email or I'll have them in a video link description at the bottom of YouTube. And obviously talking about YouTube, I use a lot of YouTube. I put so many things on YouTube, and I've been thinking just to make sure that anything I put on YouTube doesn't have student records, anything identifiable about a student. Again, having a student gradebook up would be a problem. Having, I'll show you an example here. So this is in Final Cut Pro. This came up today. I was doing this gradebook check-in video, and it's been published. I spent quite a bit of time going back and redacting student names. So obviously, if I'm clicking on the class itself, public information, all it says on the screen right now is Anthro 106. You can gain that information going to ltcc.edu, looking at our website, our catalog, our schedule of classes. That's not a FERPA violation. This, however, would be. I go to my gradebook view, and I would have all of these student names on the left showing. What the law says is you can't do that. You're protecting any rights of your students, particularly related to listing of things like rosters or names in classes. So an individual student in my Anthro 106 can know that another different individual student is in that class. But the outside world cannot necessarily know that, and that's that issue of protection and privacy. FERPA also says that individual students can give consent, and we can talk about that later if you did want to share something about how to obtain written consent in terms of maybe trying to share a video. So this is one of my techniques of dealing with this, and unfortunately it does involve a little bit of technology. What I have to do this, and I'll show you this just because it came up today, is I have to select a section of video. So I would select this section of video in which names appear. I then have to I can do a number of different things. I have a pretty easy censor filter on here. that I drag in, and the minute I drag that in, I can choose the size of the filter. I can have a really large radius that would almost be the entire screen. And what happens is when I play it, as you're seeing here, it pixelates. You'll see some movement. So as I'm scrolling in my video, it's still protecting what's there. I could actually go in, and besides pixelate, I could choose blur. I could choose darken, which should darken the screen, and then I could choose a rectangle. And what's nice about that is if it's a rectangle, I can maybe just pick up that amount of information and pull it out. So that's one technique of doing this. Another technique is to go in and to do something like a trim or a crop. So if I crop my video, I can choose the amount of the screen that I want to show on the screen. Again, a lot of this is pretty high level, but I was telling someone today in our workshop that you can certainly do this in iMovie, in Adobe Premiere, and some of the other programs out there. So you can do a crop. You could also do something like going in and pulling in the case of Final Cut, it's called a generator. And these tend to be shapes and effects and kind of moving motion graphics. So I could pull in like a black image. I could black out the whole screen, or I could go in and do a real quick scale adjustment on this such that I make it the size I want. And I actually think I want to make it smaller. And then once I do that, I could change my anchor points and cover the amount of the screen I want to cover. The tricky thing about it is if you're moving your screens around, if the location of names or very specific student data that can't be shared due to FERPA changes on the screen, you have to change to accommodate that. So you're maybe making more cuts in your video and trying to blur out or blacken more stuff on the screen. So for me, I don't worry about perfection. As you can see right here, I just try to make it such that no student information is showing. Again, anything that is on the remaining columns is not specific to a student. It's not a social security number, which we stopped sharing years ago. We used to do that on records. It's not a phone number. It's not an email address. So anything that is very specific to a student, which would include a name, an address, social security number, student ID number, email address, anything personal identification that someone could use in a public forum like YouTube or wherever on the internet to get hold of another student, that would be certainly a FERPA violation. So technology is certainly something to think about. And what we can do later to kind of leave this open is if you want to do some of these techniques, we can have a conversation about it. It's probably not practical for me to one-on-one, blur out your videos. But if you had one video and it was, one area of a video, we could have a conversation. I could probably do that pretty quickly here in my video editing software if it's really important for you to share publicly. So if you don't have that technology to do that, to really blur out names, and as you can see, I've done it in different places of the video here where the location of where the personal information appeared on screen changed, then I have to think about blurring it out in those sections. And the reason I'm doing that is because I am sharing this on YouTube. So anytime I go to YouTube, and this would be another way potentially to protect student privacy, and this would be to make restrictions on YouTube itself. So those of you using YouTube, we could have some offline conversations. Any one of my videos that I have on YouTube is, and I have well over, I think close to, I don't know the total number of videos, it's well over 1,000, I'm forgetting, but I can choose the privacy level here. I can choose public, I can choose unlisted, which just means that it's harder to find, but it's still visible. Or I can choose private. If I choose private, it is exactly the same as some of the provisions built into Zoom and potentially Canvas Studio, depending on where you're sharing a video or not sharing a video. If it's private, you have to have specific permission to view it. So it's one of those things to think about. There's another level of protection here on YouTube. In most of my cases, if I'm doing a recording, I make a general statement. My workshops are typically faculty and staff from the college. And I make a statement that if you say something personal in a video and you don't want me to include that, I will simply edit that out. Or in one case, we had a recent conversation where it wasn't appropriate. We were talking about some stuff that wouldn't be appropriate to put online. We made the agreement mutually that the video would be deleted. would be destroyed. So we won't be sharing that with the outside world. So I make some very careful decisions about this, and it's kind of like the cultural anthropologist in me, because we're all trained to protect our informants. When we do field work, we protect confidentiality of the people that talk to us, no different than the restrictions of journalists, although I think anthropologists typically have a little less legal rights if there's a court case, and the same thing with sociologists. Some famous cases have come out where people were compelled to share fieldwork data in ways that typically journalists would not be compelled, or doctors or other people where there are privileges of confidentiality with lawyers and so forth. So it's an issue out there with media, because so much of our world has become public that we have to think about protecting not our informants as anthropologists, but protecting our students and their individual rights. I wanted to mention here, to go back to some policy legal stuff. I found this from Cornell.edu. They do a lot of great technology stuff, if you've had a chance to hear Dr. Pendiker and so forth. So they have this whole thing here about course content. And what it says is, course content that does not involve any identifiable student information does not implicate FERPA. So asynchronous lectures depicting only the faculty member, whether generated by Zoom, Panopto, YouTube, or whatever, could be distributed through any channels, and there are no reasons to restrict other than copyright concerns, or again, I would add privacy of colleagues if you're having personal conversations. The minute students are included in the recordings, it triggers a FERPA potential issue. So if students are included either through questions or interactions, the platform used for your classroom must be FERPA compliant. The primary restriction is that the material can only be distributed within the course, because again, FERPA always says that within that box of your students in that class, they each have their rights protected, but they each may view each other's work in the class. And that may not be everything. So if a student has office hours with you, you have a private conversation. It's not like you want to let other students hear what you talked about, because they might have a particular concern about the class or another student and student behavior in the class. So there are circumstances that confidentiality happens student to student within a class, but just logging onto Canvas, viewing anything on Canvas, viewing a video that you've posted, interacting with other students on Zoom, the stipulations of FERPA say that each student has the ability to interact with those other students. So their privacy happens extra, not intra, if you will, or inter, whichever of those you want to use. So extra would mean it's to the outside world externally. Internal means individual students can view each other in a Zoom session. And I think that's very important to understand that in FERPA. So we're going to be talking about today the rule of not taking private student information and posting it external to your class in Canvas. So this is interesting as well. The presumption is that you will not have students appearing in your lectures, but only as ancillary participants through Q&A or active teaching. It is not illegal to capture student presentations or comments in the class or share those with members of that same class. So again, it's the same class versus the outside world. However, such sessions should not be posted publicly on platforms including YouTube, Instagram, or similar social media sites. And this gets into a conversation. Again, this is Cornell, but this is really good advice for us to think about it. And I'm not sure if we're developing policies or thinking about it, but if we do, this could be good boilerplate language to think about. So almost all activities within Canva can be expected to be FERPA compliant with some restrictions. Zoom sessions initiated with Canvas and recordings are made to the cloud will be FERPA compliant. The process recordings are posted only to the Zoom cloud available through Canvas. So that to me sounds like administrator settings that Cornell is doing. Keep in mind, you have the option to share a Zoom link. If you share that Zoom link, the concern could be how that information is getting out to other students. The fact that our Zoom setting is, as we looked at earlier, not allowing us to make this public is very similar to what Cornell is saying there. And again, I think, anything in our world can be recorded. So certainly a student could record a class session. And I know there have been lecturers out there who maybe have had policies about not recording lectures or allowing students to record lectures in the face-to-face class, which could present challenges if some students need to have a lecture recording for disability compliance. So there's an issue out there certainly in terms of face-to-face classes when we used to teach face-to-face classes in privacy. They talk about Panopto, which we don't have. They talk about YouTube. And they're saying here, not allowed because it would always be public if you had student information, and even Qualtrics surveys here in terms of online assessment features in Canvas. So there's a lot of interesting technology questions that come up with FERPA. So I recommend this Cornell guide. And then @ONE did a really good guide here, April 3rd, FERPA compliance and student records. This talks a little bit about Zoom settings, local recordings, requirements of students to share their video during a session, sharing class recording screen captures of a Zoom session, can the instructor show recordings from last year's class to the current class? So this was very clear in terms of answering that question that came up today. Under FERPA, the situation must be treated as if the recordings were being shown to a third-party audience, which requires FERPA compliance through the use of consents from identifiable students or by editing those out from the video. And just continuing along here with the @ONE guide, I think there's some really useful information. Again, I won't cover everything, so check out the links and you can read more about their tips. This I thought was interesting that they recommend ways of de-identifying student names or student information in a video. So if you're trying to record a class session that's, let's say, a combination tutorial, lecture, where you're going to have some active student participation, and then you want to reuse that video in a later class, again, you have to take out all the identification of personal student information from that video. And we'll talk about that in a second, but that will include names, that would include images, avatar, any kind of personal identifications that could specifically allow someone from the outside world to see who someone is. Again, it doesn't apply to you. It may not apply to students if they provide written consent, but we really as an institution haven't defined a policy for that. So I think this is really good information to have because it does allow you ahead of time to really think about customizing the classroom experience, the video experience, particularly if you plan to use it in the future or you do want to share it outside of the class itself. So I think what we can say today is in terms of any of that technological stuff and know-how that you want some help on, if you want to try to take a video and strip it of personal information of students, get in touch with me and we can have a private conversation or schedule a workshop if there are enough people who might be interested in something like this. Again, it's not the kind of thing you could do in Zoom. It's not the kind of thing you could do in Canvas Studio. Those programs don't have built-in editing. They don't really have a way of doing this. Now, if you're teaching a class, one recommendation I would offer to you is when you do a screen share, this is going to be a very easy technique actually. So if I'm doing a screen share of something, and let me just for the sake of what I'll do here is I'll open up my Canvas class, and this will be a case then that I don't want to do something in post-production. So I specifically want to block out student names. Keep in mind right now, if I go into my Canvas class and I record a video and I show this to the outside world, there are quite a few places where FERPA could be violated. That would be anywhere in discussions, because discussions will very typically have a student avatar. It will have a name of a student, potentially contact information. If I click on people, obviously that's going to have full-fledged student information. That violates FERPA. And then also, of course, grades. I really never would want to show my gradebook unless I've redacted anything like it did in a recent video. So again, if I recorded this right now using the screen capture in Canvas Studio, one option is to take this into Final Cut and then to find those frames or sections of the video that I need to redact the information. Once it's redacted, it's not available. There's no way for anyone to go in and take out my filter. That's there forever. But if you don't want to do that, because it does require another step getting into video editing, here's an easy way to do it. You could open up PowerPoint, and you could do this with a PowerPoint shape, or I'm just going to take out this here. You could actually do it with this particular slide itself. What I'm trying to do here is create a way to block out information as I'm on a Canvas site. There's really nothing in Canvas that's going to allow me to pull up another window. So what I need to do this is to have two windows open. I could do this, and as an example, if I opened up I'm trying to do it now here, my grades. Quickly conceal that. Again, the minute this is recording, it's going to be live for everyone. If there was a little glimpse even like there, you don't want that present. So to take out the student's name, I could do something like this, right? And then it's not showing. There's no specific student by student information here. And obviously very particularly, we wouldn't want to do this showing student grades. A lot of it's common sense. I think an easier way of doing this is getting something like a screenshot, and if you need help on this, let me know. Have it on my desktop, and then I will open my grading page. And the reason I'm doing this is there aren't borders, and you can resize, depending on what you're working with, Mac or PC. It's not going to be perfect if you're going to get borders here, but that's still going to block out information. Then I could take my page, and I have to do this in such a way that if my grading information is on the left here, I have to have this on top of it. You could probably arrange the flow of your windows on your computer, but obviously the minute I click this, if anything is showing here with the student name, it's going to show on the screen. So it's actually not the easiest thing to do, because I want to position it in such a way. I guess I could look at the columns below here. I'm peeking at the bottom, and once I get to student name, so this should do it. So what I could do is click this here, select the preview window, and then cover this up. The real trick, though, at least working with a Mac doing this, is the minute I click this, it's going to bring it to the front. Now, I can also do things with minimizing windows, and I could just hide windows off screen. So that's another option for you too. So an easy way is if you bring it up and you immediately put it left. If it's a left column, student name, student information, that could hide it. You could also do it on the right side of your screen if you had information showing on the right. So it's not the easiest thing, and you can see that's kind of why I do it in post-production, because you have to think about it, and the minute you record it, if you're not doing any edits on your video, you're kind of stuck with whatever is recorded. And the minute you have any student information appearing in that video, it would be a FERPA violation. So it just requires a little bit of thought about how to avoid that in a live class. So one of the things you can do as we close out some ideas here is, if you're recording a class lesson, you could do your best to really not allow student windows to be shared. You could do that with your cropping of your recording, such that you're only getting directly what's on the screen and you're not getting identifying student information. Again, with my interpretation of FERPA, if a student doesn't give his or her name, if they're just talking in the background during your lecture, I would say that that's not a FERPA violation, because you're not identifying that student. If there are some questions about that, we could always talk about a process down the road of obtaining individual student consent with potential FERPA issues. So this kind of summarizes stuff. I think with the technology, let's talk offline if you have concerns, and then we could hopefully have some opportunities to discuss how to approach this. Again, think of your class as this closed off space to the outside world. Anytime you share any of this student information beyond the class into the outside world, whether that's YouTube, whether that's a link you send to a bunch of colleagues of a Zoom lecture that contains sensitive student private information, that is sharing with the outside world. This could include names, identifying contexts, information, addresses, email addresses, personal identification numbers, and of course, personal images. So if you're recording a Zoom class and you have personal images and you have the student names there, again, that would involve, if you have that video that you want to reshare in the future, that would involve somehow redacting all of that personal student information using editing software, using cropping, using some of the techniques I talked about today. Keep in mind with Zoom, if you stop your screen share and students start talking, you're going to get a big picture version of that on the screen with your screen share. So it's just really important to remember all that and maybe think that through before you record a lecture or a Zoom session that you want to reuse or share with the outside world. So in this case, sharing with the outside world would be sharing it on YouTube or sending the link to groups of people outside of this class. Again, if there's something involving a student discipline issue, and there was a video share with a number of administrators or people on a panel, that could be a different context of FERPA. We're talking about the outside world, like with YouTube or sharing it on public sites where personal information gets out there. It could also then happen if you retaught the class. So I teach my Anthro 106 in fall 2020. I do it again, let's say in fall 2021, and I have a class lecture that has students from fall 2020 that I share again in fall 2021. According to the letter of the law, that's a violation of FERPA because I'm sharing it now with a second class. So what I'm doing is this, right? But that's still violating FERPA because what FERPA says is it's the students inside that specific class. If a student in your fall 2021 class is viewing student videos and student information from your fall 2020 class, those are not the same classes, thus it's violating FERPA because it's very specific to that one class. So one way to do this again is de-identification. So if you're setting up a lecture, don't have a lot of or any personal student details, or do that editing technology stuff in post-production to take out the identifying factors that will then result in a non-FERPA issue. So that's those are the context then of student information. One easy way around this is to share only within your class. So create videos, share those only inside the one class that you're teaching. If you're doing a lecture and you know ahead of time, hey, I want to use this lecture a year from now, the smart thing to do is do this process of de-identification if you want it to involve students. If it's just you doing a tutorial, again, you could be going through a Canvas class, just make sure you redact any personal student information in a live class. If that's the case, you're going to be fine because it's just you in the video. You can share that through the end of time, however long eternity lasts. We'll have to see past the November election, but however long that lasts, you have no issue. The only issue comes up is the personal student identifying information. So share within the class only is an easy solution. Do the redaction if that is something that you feel comfortable doing technologically. Again, I'm really happy to help work with editing some videos with you. I do it daily. There's not a day that goes by that I'm not editing or creating a video. I think it just has to be practical. So obviously if 70 people are asking for that, and if it involves frame by frame editing of stuff, I don't know if that's going to be the best use of my time. But if I can do that for one of your videos and involves one simple crop, that'll take me like 10 minutes to do. So reach out one-on-one and we can have a conversation. I'd love to help you on any of that technology as much as I can. So editing, using filters, sensor filters, as I showed you today, those tricks would definitely work to take out all student information. And all is in caps because it has to be every bit of student information, not just some of it. So anything that identifies a specific student has to be removed from that video. The last process here, and as the phrase goes, this is above my pay grade because I'm not a manager, I don't have any authority. But what I would say is we could, as a college, talk about a policy of obtaining student consent. And let me just show you what one of those looks like. I found a sample online here. And this is a sample here from UCSF, a very good institution of higher learning. And it just shows you that it's the students saying that they basically relinquish the privacy under FERPA in the given condition as stated. And this obviously would be customized per institution. So I'd be happy to try to engage with some folks on campus. If this affects a lot of people, I could do a poll and we can have a conversation. But what this would involve is students one-on-one saying, I, so-and-so, hereby give you consent that I understand that my FERPA rights, what they are, and I'm allowing the college LTCC to use my likeness or video in the future. And there are issues, there are cases. There was a case back with one of the Big Ten schools many years ago where students were signing, they sign consent forms. It's kind of like if you walk into a space and they say there might be filming going on and you relinquish your ability to control your image. A lot of that happens with social media today, as I talked about earlier. But in this case, I think it was at Ohio State University, or maybe it was the University of Iowa, it was one of the Big Ten schools. They took a student's image from some campus event, and then they actually photoshopped it on top of an image of a crowd. And the sort of sinister interpretation here in terms of race was that they were using students of color's likenesses to show that the crowd was not as white as it looked, which seemed pretty bad. But it also seemed bad that they took that student's image and likeness and put it in a context in which it wasn't originally intended. So that seemed a little fishy. So It's obviously a concern if you have to obtain student consent. We just want to make sure. I'm sure if the college developed any kind of policy like this, it would have to go through our local district council to make sure that it's legally correct and everything. So this probably process here is maybe to be determined if some of you want to try to share videos. It would be easier for us to go back and re-record, or if it's possible for me to work with you and do some of that technological fixing in post-production, because again, we really do want to protect all of the rights of all of our students in terms of FERPA. So that is it today. I wanted to just give you this video as an opportunity to think about some of these issues as they affect you. Let's connect offline and see if there are any solutions out there, because it came up in our Thursday technology talk today. And I had thought about it before in terms of that Canvas combining sections issue, but I hadn't thought about it in terms of the video issues that are coming up, except in my own uses, as I showed you today with the filters. So more to cover on this topic, an important topic. As always, if questions come up about any of these issues, reach out to me. We can set up a time to connect and talk, and do take advantage of our Tuesday teaching talks and our Thursday technology workshops, because those are where we can all come together and discuss a lot of these issues and problem solve some solutions, in this case to something like FERPA and class recordings in Canvas Studio and Zoom. So thanks for listening, and I'll be back with more videos like this on future topics to come.